What happened that time you saw the fury of a patient man? Story 1. When I was in high school, an upperclassman at my all-male Catholic school attempted to commit a heinous crime against a female teacher in the restroom. She was screaming, but before she could do anything, he pulled out a knife. Thankfully, our gentle and caring Latin instructor, who was known for his socially awkward nature, took immediate action. He rushed in and delivered an impactful punch to the perpetrator before dragging him out by his collar. After making sure the traumatized teacher was okay, the professor returned to his classroom and continued his lecture as if nothing had happened. Everyone gained a huge amount of respect for him that day, and although he is still a bit strange, we know he is a brilliant and calm man who speaks 7 languages and has yet to go on a single date. Story 2. I worked at a retail store where my manager was an incredibly kind and gentle man, about 5'5" in stature and not particularly muscular. I never saw him show any signs of anger, except for one time. A wheelchair user, Bill, from another department was stocking shelves when a large, intimidating man started arguing with him about whether certain items were in stock. The man quickly lost his temper and attempted to pull Bill from his chair and beat him up. I started running towards them in an attempt to prevent the altercation, but before I could get there, my manager appeared out of nowhere and tackled the man to the floor. After a few punches were thrown, the assailant gave up and my manager proceeded to sit on his head until the police arrived 15 minutes later. Story 3. My school teacher was a paragon of patience and kindness. He would work with any student until they were able to understand a concept, often sacrificing his lunch break in the process. There was this one girl who was especially challenging. She had a knack for being rude and would often disrupt the class. Despite her attitude, he never lost his temper and attempted to discipline her, but to no avail. One day during chemistry class, she decided to drink a Coke, despite my teacher's warnings about potential contamination risks. After months of her insolence, he finally had enough. He slowly walked over to her desk and, without warning, poured the Coke over her head. He then returned to the front of the class and continued teaching like nothing had happened. Needless to say, he got fired for his actions, much to our dismay. Story 4. When my dad was a young man of around 17 or 18, he was unfortunate enough to get into a car accident that was not his fault. His accident was with an overly aggressive lawyer who threatened him and declared that my dad would pay for the damages because of his profession. My dad's grandfather was a wise and composed individual with a formidable reputation, having achieved success both in the military, World War II, and the sports arena, semi-pro football, boxing in Philadelphia. When the grandfather heard of the lawyer's behavior, he went to his house, and although my dad never knew what happened, the lawyer was never heard from again, and my dad got a new car. My grandfather kept his actions from that day a secret until his death. Story 5. Back when we were 12 or 13 years old, a classmate or a friend of mine was renowned amongst our peers as the Game Boy geek. He was always the one you could turn to if you needed help with a level or a boss. He was also notorious for playing Game Boy on the bus ride home each day. One day, a kid decides to come up to him and starts turning off his Game Boy. Despite the disruption, my friend displays no reaction and calmly turns it back on and continues to play. The other kid keeps turning it off over and over again. This goes on for some time. When the other kid reaches for the 15th time to turn off the Game Boy, my friend, without taking his eyes from the screen, calmly intercepts his finger and breaks it before resuming his game as if nothing happened. Story 6. When I was in school at around 13 years old, there was a girl who was very introverted and bookish and seemingly oblivious to the goings-on around her. On one particular day, a bully decided to pick a fight with me. He shoved me to the ground and began to kick me. Suddenly, this same girl who had been a victim of his bullying sprang into action and punched the bully in the face with a force that left him unconscious. Story 7. In study hall at high school, I was sitting at a table with some friends. One of my friends, who was with us, who was from another group of friends and was not too familiar with the other guys at our table, was a very nice and shy person, but he was huge. He was 6'4" and weighed a whopping 300 pounds. One of my other friends, a tiny kid weighing no more than 130 pounds, was teasing him and pushing his buttons. Yet the big guy was ignoring him and just focusing on his homework. However, eventually the smaller kid managed to press the right button, and without warning, he was sent flying through the air and slammed against the wall. Story 8. We were on a Boy Scout trip when the Scoutmaster decided to make an inappropriate and sexist remark about my mom. Without a second thought, my dad sprung into action. He picked up the Scoutmaster by his throat and tossed him across a picnic table. He then proceeded to give him 3 full body punches to the side of his head before standing up, completely unruffled and saying, "Son, grab your things, we're leaving." Story 9. At a family wedding reception in the 1950s, two burly motorcyclists crashed the party and began drinking and using foul language. One of the women asked Howard, the bride's father and a former professional wrestler in his 60s, to intervene. Without hesitation, Howard approached the man and firmly stated, "Gentlemen, you'll have to leave now." The man replied, "F you," in defiance. My dad said that Howard responded with lightning speed, quickly putting the man in an arm lock and warning, "You're leaving now or I'm breaking your goddamn arm off." The men hastily left, much to the relief of everyone present. Howard's son, Mike, a professional wrestler himself, was in another room at the time, but had he been aware of the situation, he likely would have killed the man. Story 10. As we were leaving the tomb of the unknown soldiers, my family witnessed a startling scene. A lady, taking her child's hand, had ducked under the velvet rope, seemingly unaware of the guard marching back and forth. When the soldier reached the end of his path and caught sight of the woman, he immediately snapped his rifle into firing position and yelled, "Halt!" The woman froze before quickly scrambling back under the rope, dragging her child behind her. I was certain that I was about to witness something terrible, but the guard carefully watched her until she was back on the other side of the rope before resuming his duty with a precise shoulder of his rifle. Story 11. My friend had a rough time when he suffered a broken hip and was confined to a wheelchair. One day at the gym, a freshman decided to push him around against his will. My friend yelled at him to stop, but he kept going. That's when my friend hit the brake, stopping the wheelchair in its tracks. The freshman seemed ready to continue pushing, so my friend stood up from the wheelchair and grabbed him by the collar, lifting him off the ground and just staring at him for 5 seconds. The kid ran off in tears, and my friend returned to his wheelchair with a huge smile on his face, recounting the story and how scared the kid had been. Story 12. My dad's patience had finally been pushed to the limit when he encountered a VCR that had a history of eating tapes. He tried the conventional methods of removing the cassette, but to no avail. In a fit of frustration, he picked up the VCR, unplugged it from the wall, and heaved it out of the second-story window. But that wasn't enough to satisfy his rage. He then drove his truck back to the house and ran over the VCR multiple times. His actions resulted in it being thoroughly destroyed. It would seem that such an extreme event has yet to repeat itself. Story 13. When I was in middle school, I had a teacher named Mr. Wright who was an incredibly kind and compassionate man standing at an impressive 6'4". He always made time for anyone seeking help, no matter how busy he was. Trevor, a typical middle school troublemaker, gave Mr. Wright a hard time every single day. However, one day when we were turning in a big project, Trevor announced, "I didn't do it." Mr. Wright replied with an air of surprise, "Oh, really, Trevor? What a shocker," before flipping the table at the front of the room and screaming, "What a surprise that you wouldn't have it done." The doors connecting the teachers' rooms opened, and the teachers on either side came running in. The whole class was stunned. From then on, Trevor put in the effort to complete his homework for the remainder of the school year.